It is Oscar nominations mornings, and Jaws are on the floor across Hollywood, across America. Daniel Montgomery, and I'm Tom O'Neill here at Gold Derby with our reactions. And they begin with the contenders who have the most. Birdman and Grand Budapest Hotel lead with 9 nominations. Imitation Game has 8, American Sniper and Boyhood at 6. The biggest jaw-droppers of the morning in terms of snubs. No Lego Movie. We thought that was going to be the front-runner for Best Animated Feature. It is not there. We have no Jennifer Aniston, after all, after nominations at previous Precursor Awards. And the other actors snubbed include Jake Gyllenhaal, David Oyelowo, Jessica Chastain, Amy Adams, Rene Russo. And among the directors, there's no Ava DuVernay for Selma. Clint Eastwood, Damien Chazelle, we thought might get in for Whiplash. No David Fincher. Let me come to you. Daniel, what's your big takeaway from all this news this morning?
Big takeaway for me was the interesting sort of performance of Selma, which is that it was nominated for Best Picture. There are 8 nominees for Best Picture this year. There were 9 the last 2 years. Its only other nomination is Best Original Song, so it's one of the 8 best pictures of the year, but it has none of the best acting, none of the best directing, none of the best writing, cinematography, editing, any of that, which is, it's almost a big, it's great that it got a nomination for Best Picture, but it's very conspicuously absent in other categories. It feels almost like a bigger slap than, say, something like Foxcatcher, which was nominated for 5 awards, but missed out on Best Picture.
Right, even though Bennett Miller was nominated for Best Director, which is very strange to have it go the other way. Now, Selma, let's finish this thought here. A lot of people thought early on that it could win Best Picture, and the lack of its nominations at the Guilds was blamed on the fact that screeners were not sent to those organizations. But they were sent to BAFTA, where it got skunked, and they were sent to the to the Motion Picture Academy. So that's a problem here. Let's look at some of these other races here. So all this said, some of the significant tea leaves that we look for as pundits. Let's immediately go to who wins here, Daniel. No Birdman for editing. Normally, you need a corresponding nomination for editing, so that's out. So suddenly we see this as a race between Boyhood, which has all the key nominations it needs, and if there's a spoiler, where does it come from? Is it Budapest? I mean, it pulled off a jaw-dropper at the Globes recently. Could there be a surprise in this race?
I'm not sure we're going to see a surprise anymore. I mean, Boyhood, and I'd love to see more surprises, but Boyhood, like you said, got all the nominations it needed. No Birdman for Best Editing is really surprising. Normally I would be open to an exception to that rule, but Birdman had such conspicuous editing, and that it was sort of invisible because the film looks like, one take, even though it wasn't. So the editing seemed to be very important there. Boyhood doesn't have the most nominations, but it was never going to get a lot of below-the-line nominations. It got all the ones it needed. It got, picture, director, screenplay. It got 2 acting nominations, and it got an editing nomination. And so, as of now, I don't see anything overtaking it, even Grand Budapest.
I don't either, but we should note that Imitation Game also has the very important key nominations here as well to do it. Let's talk about some of the surprises that got in for acting here, and they, of course, include Bradley Cooper, who's now 3 for 3. I mean, every time we downplay this guy, he comes through. And a lot of people thought he couldn't this time because he's been out in New York on stage, on Broadway, in The Elephant Man, so he's not been around to campaign. That didn't matter at all. He got in there. Marion Cotillard got in, and my buddy Steve Carell. And I was betting on Steve Carell. Let's talk about some of the the last-minute changes we made, Daniel. Last night I kicked out David Oyelowo and brought in Bradley. I got all 5 Best Actor contenders right, and I did it at the last second. What are you happy about in terms of your predictions?
Not much that I can think of. At least in terms of last-minute changes, I can't think of many that paid off. I did put in American Sniper into picture, sound editing, sound mixing, and screenplay, so I got those, though I missed editing and Best Actor. What else did I get right?
Well, we're running the scores right now, by the way. Everybody at home, we've boosted our server capacity, so we are right now calculating the scores. In the past at Gold Derby, you've had to wait, several hours to find out how you scored against yourself, against your past scores, your friends. Right now, the experts, etc. You should know momentarily here. What are some of the other headlines here, Daniel?
Another big headline, which actually makes me kind of mad, even as madder than Selma being snubbed in most racers, is Life Itself not nominated for Best Documentary Feature, which is not only a snub of Roger Ebert, who loved cinema as much as anyone on Earth, but also Steve James, the director, who was snubbed for The Interrupters most recently. His snub for Hoop Dreams back in the 90s is one of the most notorious Oscar snubs in the documentary race. That alone caused several rule changes in the documentary procedure. So not to see him nominated for directing the Roger Ebert documentary, it feels like they have it in for both of them in some strange way. I don't understand it.
Marion Cotillard getting in over Jennifer Aniston. How'd that happen?
I was so thrilled when I heard Marion Cotillard's name, and then so sad to know that means Aniston is out. I loved both those performances. I would have nominated both of them, but I suspect it's just a matter of, first of all, Cake is was this really little movie that it did manage to get into a few races at SAG, at Critics' Choice, Golden Globes. I think maybe they just didn't take Jennifer Aniston seriously enough yet. They weren't necessarily comfortable maybe marking Jennifer Aniston's name as a Best Actress of the Year contender, which I don't think is fair. Maybe that is what happened, or maybe it isn't. But that might be it.
There's evidence on this Oscar list now to disprove that the assumption that you're making behind the assertion you're making, which is that they didn't take her seriously as an actress, maybe because. I suppose you're saying that because she's a sitcom TV actress foremost, but so is Steve Carell, and that's what I was looking for today. If Aniston was snubbed, I expected Steve Carell to be snubbed too. That kind of corresponding thing there, but the linkage wasn't there. This seemed to be either they just loved Marion Cotillard so much there was no room for Jennifer Aniston, or they just didn't like Jennifer Aniston or this movie. Now, it's very rare, isn't it, Daniel, that somebody gets in at Critics' Choice, Golden Globes, and SAG and doesn't get in at the Oscars. Now, it happened last year to Tom Hanks with Captain Phillips. It happened, there's a couple other examples, right? But in general, that's not the case. And so who were the biggest surprises who got in then, who defied that trend? I guess were...
Definitely Bradley Cooper. He didn't get in anywhere before this, really. Looking through the list, it looks like Marion Cotillard she was nominated. She's nominated at Critics' Choice tonight, so she got at least one of those. Everyone in supporting actor has been around across the board, and Laura Dern. Laura Dern also missed most, if not all, of the previous events for Wild. She got into supporting actress.
So she's like that Jackie Weaver, from Silver Linings Playbook, who was snubbed across the board too, and then sneaks in here. We like to see that. We'd like to know that these races aren't all locked in by the precursor awards, and there may be some suspense moving forward. What else, Daniel?
It's interesting to note, Best Actress, and it just goes to show you how male-dominated these Oscars are in terms of the contenders across the board, that in Best Actress, 3 out of the 5 nominees for Best Actress are the only nominations for their film. Marion Cotillard in 2 Days, One Night, Rosamund Pike in Gone Girl, and Julianne Moore, the presumed frontrunner for Still Alice. And then you have Reese Witherspoon in Wild. She's one of only 2 nominees for her film other than Laura Dern. Felicity Jones is the only lead actress, apparently, in a picture worthy enough to honor elsewhere. So I really think this shows a really disappointing gender disparity in terms of what was recognized across the board.
Or it may be good news, Daniel. Think of it this way. We noticed a trend last year where the 20 nominees for acting came from, I think, 7 movies nominated for Best Picture. It was the smallest concentration ever that we'd ever mapped at the Oscars of proof that you'd need to be nominated for Best Picture in terms of getting a nomination for acting. But if that kind of opens up here, I think that's good news. By the way, as Daniel has already mentioned, there were only 8 nominees for Best Picture. That's a first because they have been going for 9 recently since the expansion to 10 and being flexible. The 2 movies that didn't get in, Gone Girl and Foxcatcher, based on the predictions at Gold Derby, that's significant, I think. But what's not significant is that we see it popping up elsewhere. There's no... Where am I going with this? I've lost my train of thought here. Daniel doesn't know. Well, either do I. But you're no help. You're fired.
Sorry.
You're supposed to catch me when I fall here. What else here, Daniel? Let's point out some good... Oh, let me go back to the Aniston thing. So, Jennifer Aniston hired this year very, very shrewdly Lisa Tayback, who is one of the premier Oscar consultants. She very recently was the consultant who shepherded Harvey Weinstein to those victories in Best Picture for The King's Speech and for The Artist. She's been around forever, and she's worked on campaigns for Sony Pictures and for Paramount, etc., etc. This year, Lisa became a free agent. She's been working behind the scenes on such things as How to Train Your Dragon 2, which pulled off an upset, of course, for Best Animated Feature at the Golden Globes, and now could possibly win over Big Hero 6 at the Oscars without any Lego movie in there. But she's also been working on Sony and some other big things here. But her big project was trying to get Jennifer Aniston into this race. And the premiere of Cake was last night, right about a block or two behind me here at the ArcLight Theater in Hollywood. And it's got to be extremely sad right now in a couple of rooms over at the Four Seasons Hotel in Beverly Hills, because they had actually set up for tomorrow an actual junket interview. Now, there are normally junkets for movies, but I've never before heard of a junket for a single star. So they had set up rooms over there with 2 camera setups so that journalists like myself go in, we could get a cross cut. And I was, and Gold Derby were given a special 7-minute double slot. Thank you, Jennifer, for thinking of us. But of course, since that nomination hasn't happened, they have. It's a lot like the night that Judy Garland lost at the Oscars for A Star Is Born, and they had all the cameras set up outside her window at the hospital as she was giving birth to her baby Joey, and she couldn't be at the ceremony, and they were all going to go to Judy, you know, with her little baby in her arms at the hospital, and then whoops, Grace Kelly won for The Country Girl, and they dismantled all the cameras and they went home. This is the nominations variation of that. We're very sorry about this, Jennifer, for you, because there is a bias against television, of course, at the Academy Awards and in Hollywood in general, in favor for the silver screen. And while Steve Carell was able to cross that line this year, you were not. Daniel?
Yeah, well, you mentioned the sitcom connection. I don't necessarily think they're on the same level. Steve Carell and Jennifer Aniston. I think Jennifer Aniston has had a much bigger bias to overcome, and that she's not only the sitcom star, she's a tabloid star, and she has made these, you know, comedies in the past several years that people didn't generally like. So I think Steve Carell, had much less of an obstacle to be taken seriously as a dramatic actor than Jennifer Aniston did. So I think there still might have been some of that in there. So yeah, it is unfortunate not to see her nominated. I think she should have also been nominated several years ago for The Good Girl, about 10 or 12 years ago. So I really wish that. I hope this leads to her being taken more seriously and getting more of these kinds of roles, and maybe the next time she's in this position, there's a better result for her.
What happened to Nightcrawler? We thought that could get in for Best Picture. It's not up there now. It did get the screenplay nomination, but it didn't get Jake. Now, this is a little indie movie put out by Open Road Films, which is headed by Tom Ortenberg, who is the former president of Lionsgate, and that was the man in the studio that gave us the big upset for Crash. In other words, Ortenberg and his team were very savvy in terms of Oscar campaigns. They had been working again with Strategy PR, headed by Cynthia Swartz, who helped bring in that win for Crash. It didn't go as far as we thought it could today, did it, Daniel?
Yeah, not nearly. I was very surprised. I had this getting in for actor and supporting actress and also screenplay. It just seems it seems unusual given all the places it showed up. In terms of the AFI, the Critics' Choice list. So this is a big surprise that of all of those potential nominations, it only got into original screenplay. I wonder if we're also seeing, like, we look at that Best Actor race where Jake Gyllenhaal was snubbed. We're seeing some of the possible contenders who couldn't get in and the contenders who did get in. And again, we're seeing again the Oscars are obsessed with actors playing real people, because the two who were sort of on the fringes, Steve Carell and Bradley Cooper, they both play real life people. And two of the people who had the potential to get in, Ralph Fiennes and Jake Gyllenhaal, were left out for playing fictional characters. If you play a fictional character, or apparently Martin Luther King, you're not taken seriously.
Right. 8 out of the last 10 winners for Best Actor were all based on real-life people. If you count Daniel Day-Lewis's There Will Be Blood win as a real person. It was kind of a fictionalized account of the oil baron, of course, Doheny, but it was really him. Do the nominations this morning change anything? In other words, Marion Cotillard pulled off an upset to win this race in the past. Could she do it again? Could Bradley Cooper somehow bump out Keaton or Redmayne here? What do you think? Any possibility? Just talk about the Julianne Moore, Marion Cotillard possibility here, and that is, I've said in our past slugfests this wry, bitchy comment that a couple Oscar voters have said to me, who basically said, I have no intention of watching Still Alice. It's a movie about Alzheimer's, but I'm still going to vote for Julianne Moore. There is this tendency at the Oscars to reward someone who's overdue, regardless of what the movie is. And while Still Alice is a fine film, it's okay. It's certainly not great cinematic art, and it's not really a performance for the ages. But the poor dear is in her 50s. She's lost 4 times. She's Julianne Moore, for God's sake. On the other hand, she lives in New York, not in Los Angeles. She's not part of the the inner LA community in that sense. Although she's certainly been around for so long on so many movie sets, I'm sure that she's formed enduring bonding friendships everywhere else. Is she vulnerable? Do you think anybody could take her down?
Not based on these nominations. I mean, I think the closest one to her probably is Felicity Jones, just because there's so much broad support for that film compared to every other nominee in the Best Actress category. It's the only nominee up for Best Picture. It's got writing nomination. It's got the co-star Eddie Redmayne nominated. So that maybe could be an outside chance, but it's like you said, people will vote for this even if they don't see it. I like it. I like the film. I think Julianne Moore is excellent in it. It's probably not going to be remembered as one of her best performances necessarily, but it's really the give her the Oscar already movie, and I think people are going to heed that.
The Imitation Game has continued to pull off these amazing wins. I mean, nominations across the board here. Pete Hammond from Deadline Hollywood, an esteemed Oscarologist who we all look up to, has Imitation Game in first place to win, by the way. And it has all those key nominations this morning. It has Best Picture, Best Director, Screenplay, Editing. I'm pulling up Pete's predictions here now. Give me a second. Whoops, I pulled up the wrong ones. I'm looking to see who he's got for Best Actor. My question to you, Daniel, while we pull this up is, do you think we're pulling another stupid mistake of underestimating Benedict Cumberbatch? We did it at the Emmys, and in other words, could he pull off an upset here? Real life person, a real Best Picture juggernaut here, that if it doesn't get this Best Actor thing, and in a very close race between two actors, a spoiler needs far fewer votes to win. I'm looking at Pete's predictions now. He's got Redmayne out front and Keaton in second. I think it's possible. I'm not betting on it, but do you think it's possible?
I think it's possible. I think he's the only one probably with a chance to win besides Eddie Redmayne and...
No, I think Bradley Cooper has a chance to win here too. I don't think it's overwhelming, but I think it's very real.
I think maybe an outside chance. I'm not quite convinced of that yet. I mean, he did miss so many of the precursors, you know, and that would be an astonishing thing to see for that to suddenly win.
That's not true. Marion Cotillard. There are many examples of people who missed the precursors and then ended up winning, right?
Well, missed nominations at all of them. Marion Cotillard was nominated for La Vie en Rose at the SAG Awards, and she won the Golden Globe. So there was, you know, evidence there. And
she's a bad example then, but there are others. Trying to think. Christoph Waltz. No, he was nominated. He won the Globe for Django, yeah.
I guess, you know, I think you might have to go back to Marcia Gay Harden to.
I don't think we have to go back that far. We're just it's early in the morning here in LA. It's six something, so we're not coming up with our.
But the Imitation Game being the only film besides Boyhood to notch all of those important races, acting, picture, director, writing, and editing, you know, does mean we should probably take it seriously in all of those categories. Maybe not necessarily directing, but you know, in terms of the possibility that it has the support it needs to win potentially, you know, we should look at that and say, yeah, Benedict Cumberbatch could sneak in there, maybe even ahead of Eddie Redmayne. If you know, I don't know where I'd rank him relative to Michael Keaton just yet, because as you said, it's early in the morning, and I'm not sure where I'm ranking anybody yet.
Well, let's talk about that, because that's the one race where there is suspense. If we Oscarologists are right, Best Picture's over, Boyhood's got it, Director's over, Linklater's got it, J.K. Simmons and Patricia Arquette have those supporting things locked, and we've just decreed that Julianne Moore is probably unbeatable. So the one area of suspense is Best Actor. So, you know, if you look at the charts at Gold Derby of predictions since basically middle of August when we started taking them at Gold Derby, it's flip-flop back and forth. You know, Keaton was out front early on, then Redmayne pulled ahead, and then Keaton's back out front now, and then Keaton's really been pulling out front. And the Golden Globes we thought might settle this, because normally whoever has the better acceptance speech there, because we knew they were both going to win, would go on to win the Oscar, and if Eddie had really hit it out of the park, he might have cemented it. But Keaton surprised us. He had a very, very powerful acceptance speech. He even cried. And Eddie rebounded after him when he got to the podium with a good one, and I think he scored big points mentioning his honeymoon, you know, making us all very suddenly romantic and cheering him on. So I think the score now is Keaton out front. He's kind of trumped Eddie, but I don't necessarily buy it. As we go into SAG, that may be the determiner. The presumption there is that Redmayne is out. That Keaton is out front because his movie is his story. Now, he denies that, but of course it's his story. He's a man who played superheroes in the movies and then kind of wandered off the range, and then was trying to get back into serious films and serious acting anyway, as portrayed in this movie, trying to get on the Broadway show, and then you know. However you think that the ending of that movie is, or the ending of his career as of this moment. So I think, looking forward to SAG, you know, the assumption is that most actors are going to go for Keaton because that's their story. They may have had some flash of success here or there, but then some disappointment. Everybody feels that that they missed the Emperor's job at some point. So I'm not so sure of that. I think that Eddie Redmayne may actually pull ahead at SAG. It's a really cynical reason. I'm embarrassed even to express it here. But you know, he's so endearing to the gals, and there's a high gender, much better gender balance at SAG, male-female, than there is at the Oscars, where it's 70-30 for men. The gay boys are certainly going to love Eddie more than they might normally. So anyway, and I think that the performance, in theory, of everything is so emotional, and it's rapturous, and you're cheering him on, this man with disabilities, etc. And the Keaton role is kind of cynical. Anyway, I'm rambling. What happens from here in the Best Actor race? Keaton versus Redmayne?
I think it's time to wait until SAG and maybe
Oh, you
BAFTA.
can't wait. No, 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 no equivocating. We
No,
exist, Gold Derby does, as to make pronunciamentos from a mountaintop. Give me yours.
that was the beginning of my answer.
You were equivocating. Okay.
No, I mean, I think that will be the big determiner. But I think what I saw, at least at the Golden Globes, I'm not a huge believer in, if you give a good speech, you suddenly come out on front, in front. But what we saw, or at least what I saw at the Golden Globes when they gave their speeches, was I saw the first moment for a really young guy who's going to have several more moments, and the potential of a career capstone for Michael Keaton. And in terms of the Oscar narrative, which always matters in terms, the behind-the-scenes narrative as well as the one on screen, I think Keaton showed that he has that more than Redmayne does. Because I'm not sure there's going to be the urgency to award the 32-year-old giving his big breakthrough performance, as opposed to Keaton, who is like, as you said, his career is up there on the screen. For us to see whether he admits those parallels are there or not, and so that behind the scenes story I feel like is pushes him a little bit ahead. So I'm betting on Keaton at the moment, but I think if we see Eddie Redmayne win at SAG, I think that will be huge. I won't be surprised if Keaton wins at SAG. I won't be surprised if Redmayne wins. I think that could change everything.
To clarify here, by the way, we're talking about the very bizarre insistence by Michael Keaton that Birdman is not his story. Now, it is true that Inarritu says it's my story. I wrote this from scratch. I did not have Keaton in mind when I wrote it, and Keaton gets very defensive when asked by journalists whether this is his story. It says, no, I didn't walk away from the Batman movies. I left because I wanted to go raise my kids in Wyoming. And don't make that parallel to me because, Birdman doesn't equal Batman. Of course it does. Whatever little game these guys are playing with us, it would behoove Michael to just say, yes, it's my story. Because as Daniel's saying here, the backstory narrative is almost as important as the performance and everything else that's in consideration when a nominee is up for an Oscar. Matthew McConaughey won largely last year because of his backstory of going from surfer dude to serious actor. And these, Nicole Kidman won because she had just been jilted by Tom Cruise, and she had lost the year before for Moulin Rouge. And there are all these other reasons you win that Julianne Moore will validate this year when the last thing she's going to win for is that movie and that performance. But Keaton, Michael, if you're watching this or listening to the podcast version, embrace your narrative because it may be what propels you to the victory here.
Yeah, I agree, and I'll even give him the benefit of the doubt and say no, it's not your story, but you can't watch the film, or if you're him, certainly you couldn't act in the film without understanding the parallels there, whether it was deliberate or whether it was serendipity in his casting. You can't ignore it. So embrace it. It's there, even if it's not his life story per se. It's reflective of aspects of his career that really can't and shouldn't be denied.
Could there be an ABB campaign this year that is anybody but boyhood? We saw recently at the Oscars a kind of ABBB drive when it was anybody but Brokeback Mountain, and we saw Crash BM. I guess then I'm getting my acronyms off, but but there are sometimes at the Oscars a drive of and it certainly helped King's speech. It was like enough of anything but Social Network. Some people think that Boyhood is a thin movie. It doesn't have much plot. It's a great setup and a great gimmick, but are there any memorable lines? Is there any great moment of performance? What's other than the fact that the concept of this is very, very clever and daring, and the fact that it does something very well. I took it home to my family in Ohio at Christmas time, and there were 3 generations of people sitting around in that room. I showed it to them to see what their reaction was. And they said, as soon as the movie was over with, they were all loved it. They all thought it was just great. But nobody was commenting about the movie. They were all commenting about their own personal experience. You know, oh, I remember when that happened to me, and I felt this. And I thought that was a very, very insightful look at why this movie is resonating so powerfully with people. It's because they see their own boyhood or girlhood or childhood up there on that screen. What I'm getting at is if there is an ABB campaign here, as sometimes happens at the Oscars, where does it go? And Budapest has all of those key things. It has screenplay, it has editing, it has directing, it has picture, as does Imitation Game. We've talked about that. Earlier when I asked you about Budapest, you just kind of shrugged it off and no. But haven't we made the mistake all along here of underestimating Budapest all along this season? And what's the one movie that has consistently popped up at every single guild, which are the key tea leaves that point to the Oscars? Grand Budapest Hotel. Daniel, let's not write it off. I'm not saying it's going to happen, but let's not write it off. Let's talk about the scenario of where that could actually, in a weak year, prevail.
It's possible. I think it's one of 4 films, I'd say now, that Boyhood being the front runner, and 3 films that have a claim of being a potential spoiler. We've got Grand Budapest Hotel, which has the most nominations, tied with Birdman, which is another of the films, and it has all the key nominations, although it didn't get in for acting. And then you've got Imitation Game and Birdman also. Chris Beecham has a theory, of course, that he's mentioned at the Emmys and at other awards where, if there's going to be an anything but campaign, it needs to be focused around one contender. Like when Brokeback Mountain lost, there was the Crashed film to rally behind. And this has a divided kind of rivalry here where, 3 films are really trying to take out Boyhood, and Grand Budapest is one of them. It certainly can. It's the lightest of those 4 films, so that makes me not as confident about its chances pulling off a potential upset. It didn't get that acting nomination for Ralph Fiennes, potentially, which was sort of an outside chance, but for the Best Picture winner.
But you don't need that. Lord of the Rings: Return of the King won without an acting nomination. The Last Emperor won without an acting nomination. Slumdog Millionaire won without an acting nomination. So why is that so key?
Well, those were front runners already. I don't think it's key necessarily, but it's one of the things to look at that Grand Budapest Hotel, we have been underestimating. I actually slightly overestimated it at the Oscars. I was predicting it to get in double digits nominations. But I think Best Actor would have been one of the key nominations to look at where, suddenly a big contender becomes a potential upset. All those other films, Slumdog, The Lord of the Rings, they already had that front runner slot sewn up, and Grand Budapest Hotel, I think, needed a little bit of an extra push. It's still possible, but I actually think, since you mentioned the 2010 race between The Social Network and The King's Speech, I think that's an interesting parallel where we need to worry about the Imitation Game, because we saw, like Boyhood, The Social Network won all the critics. It won the Golden Globes. It's probably going to win Critics' Choice tonight. And then when the industry started announcing their winners, it was all King's Speech, King's Speech, King's Speech. So if we see that happen to the Imitation Game at Producers Guild, Writers Guild, Directors Guild, we could potentially see that become this year's King's Speech.
And of course, Imitation Game is Harvey Weinstein, as Harvey was behind King's Speech. Last question. Talk about jaw droppers today. No Lego movie for Best Animated Feature. Look, animated features are the highest grossing films in Hollywood. This may matter in some way more than any other Oscar. What wins if Lego isn't in contention? The presumption is it's Big Hero 6 versus Dragon. Dragon 2 just won at the Golden Globes. We were kind of downplaying Dragon is a serious contender here, but suddenly, obviously, it can do it. I don't know which one to bet on yet. Thank God the Prediction Center isn't totally turned on to predict winners yet. It will be within the hour or so. Where do you lean on what wins here?
It's sort of weird. I've said a couple of times that I thought the Lego Movie vulnerable in this race, but I thought it would be vulnerable for the win, not just the nomination. I thought for sure it would be nominated. So now that the presumed frontrunner is out, there's such a vacuum at the top of this race that, I mean, we've seen How to Train Your Dragon 2 win at the, Golden Globes, but there's no voting overlap there. Big Hero 6, would be the second Disney film in a row. That could happen, and I wouldn't even count out necessarily the Tale of the Princess Kaguya, which is from the same studio that did Spirited Away, which won several years ago. So and I for one am thrilled that Song of the Sea is nominated. Just as a personal note, that was probably my favorite animated film that I've seen from the past year. But yeah, I think probably one of those three at the moment. I might lean towards Big Hero 6 slightly, but not confidently.
Okay, well, thanks for narrowing it down to 3 out of 5. That's very, very, very brave of you, Daniel. All right, well, thank you. We're going to wrap this. You did. No, you rallied there and narrowed it to 1. Let's sign off here. Later today, we're going to bring on our other editors who will have more insights than we do, but it's still 6-something in the morning here, so in LA. So pardon us while we fetch another gulp of coffee and try to dig in deeper on these awards. Yowza, I hope we have some upsets. Last year the Oscars went according to script. Every single frontrunner won. Let's hope that's not the case. This year, let's hope there's some drama in the mix, and we are on the case to seek it out. Thanks.